All right, so as we get into the second part of this Anatomy of a Scientific Publication lecture, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about where we're at in the scientific method. And so, yes, even though scientific publication is the end game, we actually have to use those skills clear back in the beginning of the scientific method when we are gathering and searching for literature. And so the major parts of the scientific report are what we're going to go over pretty thoroughly in this lecture, minus the abstract. And so we'll leave discussions about the abstract, how to construct one, everything that it entails to the end of the semester. All right, so some things to consider before you begin writing. And so this is before you begin pulling or creating a literature review, which is going to be located in that introduction section of your paper. Is you have to make sure that you identify what the purpose of the paper is. And so this becomes is one of those things that should be common knowledge, but a lot of times the purpose of creating a case and reviewing literature can really get lost in the more of the minutia of carrying out a research project. So it's always really important to remember not to forget the purpose. And for us in ag, that tends to come pretty naturally. So the purpose of a lot of our research is to create more food through more efficient means and feed the world, right? And so there's going to be some verbiage that you can actually use around those big areas, but that needs to just always be on the forefront of your brain as you start with this writing process, because it's important to convey your passion for the research that's going to take place. The second thing you need to do before you write a paper is identify who your audience is. So are you writing for a panel of peer reviewers, right? So are you writing for people that have PhDs and have been in research for years? Or are you writing to farmers and ranchers that need information in some more simple terms, right? That doesn't have a lot of jargon and scientific smart person talk. Okay, the third thing you need to consider is the significance of your research. So the example that I like to give here is that if you are working in a lab and you have found through lots and lots and years of research a cure to cancer, right? So how widely should that research be disseminated? And the answer to that is probably pretty stinking widely, right? Because cancer is a global thing. And if you have some sort of fix to cure that, then it needs to be shared widely and reverently, right? Compared to if we are looking at let's see, my master's research is a good example of this. If we are looking at a DNA marker that contributes 1 to 2 pounds more of weaning weight to a yearling animal or of a weanling animal, right? So that may not be as significant as curing cancer. And so that's things to take into consideration as you start this writing process, is how widely should your research be disseminated. And then you can move right into organizing your paper. So you need to make sure that you have a good handle on what are the key ideas, are there any supporting ideas, are there specific details that need to be included, and then what background information does the reader need to know in order to understand your justification for carrying out the research project or for reading through your literature review. And you may even need to consider if there's specific data, tables, or figures that are needed to help illustrate the justification for carrying out a research project and writing a literature review. And so this is going to be a big crux of the class, is you guys are going to submit a peer-reviewed journal article to me at the end of the semester and over research that you have done independently. And so I just want you to start thinking on some of these things now in the very beginning of the semester. All right, so as we start diving into what a peer reviewed research paper looks like, all of them have titles, right? So that's one thing that every single paper absolutely has. It's the most read part of a paper. And so the title has to be good. It has to explain what was measured. It needs to be descriptive and interesting and use keywords that are free of jargon. Okay, it needs to be short and concise. So we try to get titles less than 12 words. And for APA format, it needs to be in capital letters followed by lowercase letters. So not all capitals, not all lowercase, but capital letters followed by lowercase. And we also call this sentence case. The second major part of a peer reviewed journal is going to be the authors. They typically are located underneath the title, and after the authors are listed, there is going to be some sort of designation, like an asterisk or a footnote or a superscript that is going to designate what institution that author is associated with. And so you're only going to see that on journal articles that actually have authors from multiple institutions. If everybody is from the same institution, then there won't be any superscripts. And so there's a big process to this authorship thing. It's a big part of research ethics. It's a big part of tension and debate among research groups to decide who goes on the paper as an author and where what their contributions were, and that can also help dictate the order of the authors, and that'll come up. I'll show you that in just a second. So the location of the authors on the paper really designates their importance. Okay, so we'll talk about it. The first author tends to have done most of the work. Okay, on a side note, keep in mind that having certain authors on a paper can speak to their prestige and recognition in the field and can actually get people to take your paper more seriously if they know you collaborated with somebody who's established in the field. So keep in mind, co-authors are not necessarily co-writers. And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about my first manuscript that I published in grad school, where I looked at a DNA marker called a microsatellite on bovine chromosome 5 and how it was associated with certain performance traits in cattle. So performance traits are going to be things like birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, things that can be measured during an animal's lifetime. And so I was part of a great collaborative group that was able to get a publication through in 2009 and in the Journal of Animal Science. And so this is what the first part of the paper actually looks like. So we've got the title at the top, then the authors, then all the institutions. And you can see that there's all of these superscripts associated with each individual member, and that superscript designates the institution. So like myself, Pablo, Gail, and my PhD advisor, Dr. Thomas, were all associated with New Mexico State University. But Gonzalo, Charles Farber, and Dr. Medrano were all associated with UC Davis, and then Mark was with Fort Collins, and Dr. Van Leeuwen was with New Mexico State, but in a completely different department. And so let's talk about the order of authorship here because it's important. All right, so I can tell you that I was first author. It was my entire master's degree. I did most of the work, but I also had a lot of help. So Gonzalo Rincon, he also helped me with a lot of the, with starting a lot of the analysis and understanding the results. So he and I probably exchanged over 1,000 emails in a year and a half period. Okay, Pablo Luna down here, he was in my lab. He was a PhD student in my lab, and he really helped to teach me SAS, which is an analysis software program. And so Pablo would help me to run the correct code, look at the results, and interpret the results. And so he was a real key scientist on this paper as well. And then Dr. Van Leeuwen, she was the statistician in the department. So she looked at what we did, told us, yes, you're doing it correctly, you're not violating any analysis rules, or no, you need to kind of reconfigure this. And so those four people really did quite a lot. And so Gonzalo definitely did almost as much work as I did, I think. So he goes second. And then Pablo was a little bit further down the line because he wasn't directly involved. And Dr. Van Leeuwen was more of a reference, but still very important. There was also a couple of people who are on here just because they were collaborators with the team at UC Davis and with our team at NMSU. So Dr. Farber, he actually discovered the ETH10 genotype in the bovine chromosome while he was doing his postdoc at UC Davis. But I will tell you, I think I got maybe one email from him in a 3-year period. And so I've never met him before. He's at Virginia Tech. But his discovery really early on in the process was important. So we included him on the paper. And then Dr. Inns, he is Milt Thomas's best friend, and he actually, we sent him the paper or the manuscript when we were in the proof stages because he's a quantitative geneticist. So we just wanted to make sure that that he had a good handle and we didn't violate any quantitative genetics laws that were out there. And so he read through the manuscript and provided comments back, but that was it. He wasn't really involved in the analysis process. And then Gail Silver was the technician in our lab, and she was moral support and my mom in New Mexico, and she helped me with run SAS, she helped me interpret data, she helped me make presentations. She was just with me the whole entire time. And then the last couple of authors, so Juan Medrano was a leading author who is very influential in this field of quantitative genetics. He has been in the genetics game for, 40 years, and so he carries a lot of prestige with him. And so he also was a major collaborator and headed the UC Davis group. And then the last author typically is the corresponding author or the advisor to the graduate student, and that was Dr. Thomas. So these two were senior scientists. They had the idea that got me started, and they also got the funding. And so it's important to make sure that you include all of those really important people in an authorship, but the location and the placement of their name can vary.